Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Chullin Daf Samach Aleph, and we are starting at the very bottom of Samach Amid Beis. We are on the bottom line. The Gemara says that the two dots, Simone Ha'of Lo Nemru, that in Chumash we have no indications about the status of kosher birds. So bad. We're just starting Daf Yomi now. If you are able to pick up somewhere else, okay. So the Gemara starts like this: Simone ha'of lo nemru in Chumash. It says nothing about birds. Asks the Gemara, "V'lo, is that actually true that it says nothing about birds?" Tanya, we have a brisa. The brisa quotes the pasuk Nesher. What is the pasuk of Nesher? So it says in Sefer Vayikra, "V'es ela teshaktu min ha'of lo ye'achlu sheketzeim es hanesher." So we see the word Nesher, Vatanya Nesher, turning to the top of Samach Aleph Amid Aleph. The Gemara says, Ma Nesher miyuchad she'ein lo etzba yisera. When it comes to the Nesher, there's actually a din in the Mefarshim whether or not the Nesher is in fact an eagle. We, in our modern parlance, do refer to it that way, although this is a bit of a din. But the what is unique about the Nesher is it has all simane tuma, not simane tara. So it says the Gemara as follows: what are the simane tuma of the Nesher? She'ein lo etzba yisera. It doesn't have an extra digit. Vizefek. It doesn't have a crop. Ve'ein kurkabano niklaf. Its crop is not the gizzard. Is not able to be peeled. Whatever sheath is on top of it is really adhered. V'dores ve'ochel, and it tramples over things and eats them. All of those are tamei. So then we therefore assume af kol kayotze bo tamei. Anything that possesses these four traits, or lacks these four traits, I should say, so those animals will be tamei. So this is a brisa, and the brisa, that's half number one, which speaks about the nesher, which is a treif animal, a tamei animal, I should say. However, torin, which are turtle doves, those are birds that we do eat, and we do bring even in the Beis Hamikdash, as we'll see at the end of the daf today. This is a bit of a shorter blot, and then Amir Hashem will have a regular length blot tomorrow night, and we might jump ahead tomorrow night because the blot after that is larger. So it says the Gemara, what about Torin? Sheyesh lehen etzba yisera. They do have an extra digit, vizefek, and they have a crop. The kurkaban niklaf, and their gizzard can be peeled. Ve'in darsin ve'ochlan, and the Gemara says that it does not trample food and then eat it. Those are all tahorin, and therefore af kol kayotze bahen tahorin. Therefore, all of the birds that are like that are tahor. So there's two halves of this brisa. One is the half that speaks about nesher, and if an animal lacks the four simane kashrus, then obviously the halacha is going to be that it's usher just like a nesher. We're on the top of Samach Aleph, Amud Aleph, 6 lines down. And then the second part of the brisa says that by kosher animals, they do have these simane kashrus, and therefore any animal like that is clear. What if an animal doesn't lack all four, it only lacks 3? What if it lacks 2? What if it lacks 1? So we understand the bookends. If an animal's 4 for 4 with simane tuma, the animal's like a nesher, the animal's pasha tame, that's for sure. And also 4 for 4, if it has all of the simane kashrus, you're good to go. With the exception of the Masorah issues that we've mentioned many times in shiur. So this is what we see from the two sides of the brisa, and that's the end of our question. If you look back at the bottom where we started at on Samach Amid Beis, we said, what do you mean, Simane ha'of lo ne'emru? We have a drasha based on the word nesher that teaches us what we hold. That by nesher, it lacks all 4 simane kashrus, therefore any animal that's like it is going to be tameh. And by torin, which has all of the simane kashrus, so then that's going to be tahor. So what do you mean there's not in Chumash? We learn it from the word nesher. Amar Abaye, lo ne'emar pirushan midivrei Torah el midivrei sofrin. The explanation that we just gave, right? The explanation that's in the brisa that the nesher who lacks all 4 is tameh, and the Torah and the turtle doves that have all 4 are tahor. That's not in Chumash. We make a drasha from it. The Chachamim are the ones who articulate it. But no, that itself is not in Chumash. So asked and answered, we were concerned that perhaps Simani ha'of lo namru, it's true, they really weren't. They were only stated in a brisa. And even though it's a drasha deoraisa, that's true, Chazal knew, the Chachamim knew how to interpret the word nesher. And as we'll soon unpack, it's not simple to unpack the word nesher. It's very difficult to understand how these drashas work. At least in advance of the Gemara, we'll see it's not so hard. But But just having the word nesher doesn't tell me what the four traits are. Only the Brisa does. So Mido Raisa, the Chumash says nothing. That's what the Mishnah meant when it said Simane Ha'of Lo Nemru. However, we didn't understand the Perush, and that was only Midivrei Sofer. So now the Gemara takes it to the next level. We have clarity that if an animal lacks all four Simane Kashrus like the Nesher, it's Tameh. If an animal possesses all Simane Kashrus like the Torin, then it's going to be kosher. Good to go. What about the in-betweens? What if it only had one Simon Kashrus, or two Simane Kashrus, or three? So says the Gemara, Tani Reb Chia, Of haba b'simin echad tahor, lefi she'ein dome l'nesher. So here we see that the Gemara says that which is considered a tamei bird has to check all four boxes. It has to be just like the nesher in that it lacks all four of the simone kashrus. But if you have even one siman kashrus, even though the other three simone kashrus are lacking, so it says Reb Chia in this brisa, the animal will be tahor. Nesher de lesle klal hu de lo seichel. Only a nesher and animals like it that completely lack all four simone kashrus, and you can just look back up to the top of the page. She'ein lo etzba yasera. It doesn't have that extra digit. It doesn't have a crop. Its korkaban, its gizzard can't be peeled, and it tramples. All of those things. So says the Gemara, only animals that are like the nesher are going to be asur. But ha'ika de islechad. But if there is an animal that has even one simon kashrus, so then techo, that's considered an appropriate meal to eat. No problem at all. Now, of course, this poses a problem because the parts of the brisa that we presented at the beginning of the day has two halves. Nesher lacks all four, and the Bnei Torin have all four simane kashrus. But what we did just now is infer from the Reisha by the Nesher that only when it lacks all four is it going to be tameh, but even if there's one siman kashrus, it's going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, I don't understand why you learned from the half of the brisa about a nesher. V'leilef, we're halfway down on Samach Aleph Amid Aleph. Instead, we should have learned perhaps mitorin. What do we learn from Torin? Ma Torin de'ika kulhu arba'a. Now that we know that the Torin has all four, meaning it has an extra finger, it has a crop, the kur kaban is niklaf, and it's not dores v'ochel. So maybe I should say af hachanami adeika kulhu arba. Maybe instead of saying that the nesher taught me that even if I have one siman kashrus, it's kosher, maybe I should say no, it's not kosher until I have all four simane kashrus like the Bnei Torin. It's a great question because what we learned in the Brisa at the bottom of the page on Samach Amid Beis, wrapping up to the top of Samach Aleph Amid Aleph, we learned that there's two kinds of animals. Nesher lacks all four simane kashrus, and the Torin possesses all four. So how can you say we should only learn from Nesher? Maybe we should instead infer from the second half of the Brisa that what? That we need all four for an animal to be kosher. Therefore, if an animal only has 3 out of the 4, or 2 out of the 4, and certainly 1 out of the 4 simane kashrus, it should be tameh. Says the Gemara, well, im kain, had it been true that we were able to learn from the Torin, and therefore maybe we would have thought that only if you have all 4 simane kashrus are you a kosher animal, kosher bird, but if you lack even one, you're tameh. That can't be because imkain sha'ar ofos tmein de kasav rachman alamali. No, it has to be that we learn from the world of the non-kosher, because the Torah goes out of its way to list 24 different birds in Chumash. Duchifas, Atalef, and Peres, and Ozniah, and Nesher. There's so many birds that are represented in Chumash. All of them are referenced in a way which is tameh. So says the Gemara, well, wait one second. V'neilaf minayhu, maybe from among the 24, there are actually 20, Rashi points out, that mahasam, with some of those, with 20 of them, that there's tlasa v'lo achlinan, that they possess 3 out of the 4, yet we still can't eat it. Af kol tlasa lo nechal, v'kol shekain trei v'chad. Maybe we should infer that because of the fact that of the 24 birds that are mentioned in Chumash, 20 of them only have 3, and that's tameh, all the more so if it would have only had 2 simane kashrus and certainly 1. Why don't we argue that we learn from those 20 birds? Why do we learn from the nesher? Im kain, says the Gemara, then why would an orev be mentioned? Orev de kasav rachmana lamali. See, we wouldn't know this, but an orev only has two of the simane kashrus. You wanted to ask from the 20 simane, the 20 birds that you wanted to ask from the 20 birds that have three out of the four. That makes no sense because the orev is a non-kosher animal, a non-kosher bird. It's a raven. It only has two. So then why would that need to be there? Hashta de isle tlasa lo achlinan de isle tre miboya. I wouldn't even need the reference to an orev because I already know it's going to be usser. If 20 of the 24 birds have three simane kashrus and they're treif, they're tameh, well, guess what? If you have two, you're definitely tameh. You're less kosher. You have fewer kosher features. So says the Gemara, what then would be the point of orev? And that is a good question from the Gemara. Says the Gemara, well, okay, maybe what we should do is not learn from the 20 birds that possess three out of the four simane kashrus, but top of Samach Aleph Amid Beis, heading toward the very bottom line of the page, the Leilaf mi orev. Why don't we learn from the raven, which only has two? Mahasam tre lo. Just like by the orev that has two simane kashrus, we would say no, that the animal's tameh. Maybe we should say afkol trelo. Every time we have two animals, every time we have an animal, that has only two simane kashrus, we would also say that the animal's tameh. He says the Gemara, that can't be. Im kain peres ve'oznia de kasav rachman alamali. Why then would we also have among the list of 24 birds the peres and the oznia? These two birds, write the Mefarshim here, only have one siman kashrus. So we can't learn from orev, which has two, because if we had orev that was two, we would know for sure about the peres and oznia, and then there would be no point of the peres and oznia to be mentioned in Chumash. So therefore, if the Torah says peres and oznia, and peres and oznia each only have one siman kashrus, then it makes no sense to say that we learn from orev. Hashta de isle tre lo achlinan. If it would have been that we learned from tre, from a bird that has two simane kashrus, which is an orev, that we don't eat, de isle chad mi boya. Obviously, we wouldn't have needed the pasuk of peres ve'oznia. Those words we wouldn't have needed because why? Because it's a kol shekain. If two simane kashrus are not kosher by the orev, then obviously one siman of only one siman is going to be treif, is going to be tameh by the peres and the oznia. So says the Gemara, you're right. We can't learn from the 20 that has three. We can't learn from the orev that has two simane kashrus. Maybe suggest the Gemara 4 lines down, v'nigmar mi peres ve'oznia. Maybe, says the Gemara, we should learn from when the Torah speaks about a peres and an oznia, these birds that have only one siman kashrus that are not kosher. Oh, so says the Gemara, going back to the beginning of the script. If that's true, that an animal that has only one siman is going to be non-kosher, so then why would the Torah ever speak about a nesher? Why would it speak about any animal that has more than it? We would know instantly that it should be kosher. Nesher to kasarach lamali. Why then would we need 4? After all, hashta de isle chad lo achlinan. If we know that when it comes to the peres and the oznia that has only one of the simane kashrus, but the nesher has none of the simane kashrus, de lesle klal mibaya. So therefore, says the Gemara, ella, it must be nesher de lesle klal hu de lo seichel. The nesher is the most extreme of all of the birds on the list. All of the 23 other birds have at least one siman, if not 2, if not 3. But nesher has 0 of the simane kashrus. So ha de isle chad echol. If it has even 1, then it is edible. So let's just pause right here, because this answers the question that we started with earlier on Samach Aleph Amid Aleph. Reb Chia and the Brisa, a third of the way down on Samach Aleph Amid Aleph, wanted to suggest that if an animal had even only one siman kashrus out of the 4, the animal would be kosher. And we tried to figure out whether or not that made sense. We said, well, wait 1 second. 20 of the 24 had 3 simane kashrus. Why not learn from there? Couldn't do that because of an orev which only has 2. Well, okay. Maybe we should learn from the orev that has 2 simane kashrus, which isn't kosher. But then says the Gemara, why would we do that? Peres ve'oznia have 1. We wouldn't even need orev. Well, then says the Gemara, if peres and ozni only have 1, why don't we have nesher? Elamai, it must be that nesher is our principle. That when it comes to a nesher, that's the less like klal hu de lo seichal. That when it's 0 for 4 in regards to simane kashrus, then the animal is not kosher. But had is leichad echol, and that's how the Gemara seems to conclude. If we have a bird that has only one out of the 4 simane kashrus from our Gemara, we can learn from here that it is an absolutely kosher bird. Says the Gemara, I don't understand one of the Havaminas that we had. The Gemara says a third of the way down on Samach Aleph Amud Beis, ve'ela taima de kasav rachmana nesher. The only reason why we say that an animal that has 1 siman kashrus is kosher is because we learn it from nesher that has 0. But says the Gemara, halav hachi, without the word nesher, hava amina, I would have thought that the stage before nesher is the animals that have only 1 siman kashrus, leilaf mi peres ve'oznia. But that's difficult because peres and oznia are 2 different birds that each have 1 siman kashrus. And if that's true, says the Gemara, if we would have learned havamina leilaf mi peres ve'oznia, if we would have learned from there, havale peres ve'oznia shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad, that's 2 references to the same exact din. Because the peres has only 1 siman kashrus, and the pasuk says it's not kosher, and the oznia has only 1 siman kashrus, and it's not kosher. So those 2 things are teaching us the same thing, and therefore, says the Gemara, that's shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad, and shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad ein malamdin, and that means that our havamina of learning from peres and oznia was not a reasonable havamina because you can't extrapolate anything from peres v'oznia because they function as shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad, and shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad ein malamdin. So the havamina that the Gemara presented toward the top of Samach Aleph Amud Beis, that we're able to potentially learn from peres v'oznia that if it has 1 siman kashrus, then it's not going to be kosher, but perhaps more would be kosher. That havamina doesn't work because it's shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad. Says the Gemara halfway down, Gemiri, we have a tradition. You're right, peres v'oznia each speak about only 1 siman kashrus, but the ika behai, leka behai, u'the ika behai, leka behai. Whatever the singular kashrus is, by peres is not the one by oznia. Let's say, and I don't know, that the peres has a crop and the other one doesn't. And let's say by the other one has a gizzard that doesn't have peelable skin and the other one does. Whatever the individual psul is by the peres and respectively by the oznia, they're not the same. And therefore, it's not shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad, and therefore, it's a reasonable havamina in the Gemara. Now the Gemara picks apart the 24 birds that the Torah mentions, again, some of the ones I referenced earlier, and we're going to look at them in their respective categories. Michdi, let's analyze. Esrim ve'arba ofos tmein havu. We know that there are 24 birds that were mentioned in Chumash that are tamei. I efshar dechad deika behanach leka behani. There's too many birds for it to be that there aren't overlapping psulim. Some of the birds have to carry the same psulim. The havalahu shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad. That then, by definition, should be the case. There have to be some birds that have exactly the same psulim. And Taka, this is true, because 20 of the birds have 3 psulim. But there aren't even 20 iterations of the 3. Therefore, by definition, some of the 20 birds that have a simple 3 simanei kashrus has to overlap with another. And if that's true, then those 2 different respective birds that have the same simanei kashrus are shnei ksuvan abayin ke'echad. Therefore, the Torah is duplicative one way, shape, or form, and we don't even know which birds it would be because we don't know what all those simanei kashrus are for each of those respective birds. But it shouldn't work, says the Gemara. Gemiri, we have a tradition. Esrim ve'arba ofos tmeim havu. There are 24 birds that are mentioned in the Torah. The arba simanin, and we know that when we talk about the kashrus of a bird, that there are 4 variables. Those are the 4 variables mentioned on the top line of Samach Aleph Amud Aleph that we started with tonight. Tlasa hadre bekulhu, 3 of them apply across the boards. Esrim mehem shlosha shlosha, 20 of them, have 3 each. Utrei be'orev, two of them, an orev, a raven only has two simanei kashrus. Chad bepras v'chad be'oznia, de'isei baha lesei baha. And we said that by the pras and oznia, that they are each very much individualized. So that's what the Gemara says. And shockingly, and this is possible, that there are four different variables. So if you have four variables and 24 animals, there you can have all of them having a unique set of flaws. And therefore, the Gemara says it's not a case of Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad. So therefore, we could, in theory, have learned from the Chad Bepras and Chad Be'oznia. Those two cases clearly are not Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad. So maybe we should have learned from there. So why did you say earlier, halfway down on the page, that we had to learn from Nesher that had no simanim? We should have learned from Paris Ve'oznia. Says the Gemara, because Ma'udetema leilaf mine. Maybe we should have learned Kasav Rachman and Nesher. Maybe we should have learned that Nesher de Lesle Klal hu de lo seichal ha'ika de islachad echol. Maybe we would have thought that we should have learned from Nesher, and perhaps that's not true. We should have learned from Paris Ve'oznia. If that's true, Elatorin de Kasav Rachman alamali. No, because we have too many possible sources here. It's too confusing. We have too many sources. We have 24 birds that are mentioned that are kosher. We have Torin that are mentioned. Sorry, let me say that again. We have 24 birds that are tameh, and there are many different permutations of the four simanei kashrus among those, none of which have all four simanei kashrus. Then we have the Torin, which do have all four simanei kashrus, but Paris Ve'ozni are not Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad. So why didn't we learn from there? If we were going to learn from there, why does it say Shnei Torin? It says the Gemara, you can't ask anything from the Torin case. Why? Because Amar of Ukva Barchama lekorban. The only reason why we are talking about Torin is to say that they're kosher for a korban. We're not talking about kashrus of food. It's an edible bird for sure, but that's not why it said Shnei Torin. So therefore, you cannot learn from the word Shnei Torin. And therefore, we fall back to where we were, that Nesher is our Mari Makom. Let's just learn one part of this Rashi, the last Rashi on the page, Divrei Maskeh LeKorban. We said that the word Torin is brought in Chumash to teach us that that all four simanei kashrus are present. Why was that listed? The Gemara said for the sake of a korban. What does Rashi say? Rashi says the korban shehein levadon ksherin lekorban v'lo of acher. No other birds are going to be kosher except for the Torah, except for the birds that are mentioned in Chumash. You can't just go bring any bird you want. It has to be the one that's mentioned in Chumash. And then Rashi goes on to detail some of the iterations of our Gemara. Just to conclude, and then we'll stop right here for tonight, the Gemara initially gave us the bookends that were very clear. Animals that lack all four simanei kashrus are not kosher. Animals that have all four simanei kashrus are kosher. What about when an animal has either one or two or three of the simanei kashrus, but not all four? That seemed to be different permutations. The Gemara concludes that that animal would be kosher because as long as we're deviating from the nesher that has zero, therefore, even an animal that has only one siman kashrus would be kosher. We'll stop right here. And Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night with the bottom line of Samach Aleph Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.